Hello and welcome to Science Fiction University.
We're your fan and writer hosts. I'm Blue Gal.
And I'm Drift Glass. And you can visit Science Fiction University at our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a Patreon button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution to Science Fiction University, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791. Warning! This episode contains spoilers for a 60-year-old story called The Day the Icicle Works Closed by Frederick Pohl. And if you haven't read it by now,
go read it. It's a good story.
It's a good one.
In our last episode, Too Much of a Good Thing, we talked about one of the grand masters of the golden age of science fiction, Frederick Pohl, and his story, The Midas Plague, which was published in 1954 in Galaxy magazine. We also gave you a sneak peek at the Frederick Pohl story we're talking about today, The Day the Icicle Works Closed.
And I'm going to let you in on a little secret about fiction writing, Blue Gal, that you already know. Most fiction writing does not age very well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably more true for science fiction writing than any other genre. Because when you think about it, Westerns, for example, good or bad, all deal with a specific time and place that once existed more or less. The genre we think of as detective fiction began in, believe it or not, 1841. That's 182 years ago this year, and 20 years before the U.S. Civil War. That's a long time ago. It began with one of my favorite writers, Edgar Allan Poe, his short story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and his consulting detective, C. Auguste Dupin. It was refined later into its recognizably modern form 46 years later by a guy named Arthur Conan Doyle in his Sherlock Holmes stories. This is the idea of the brilliant but socially maladapted detective, that detective's more or less normal sidekick, the ineffectual police department or representative thereof, and of course the crime and the criminal. Holmes has his loyal Watson and his hopelessly out of his depth Inspector Lestrade. Sam Spade, who, we all love Sam Spade, has his loyal Effie and the arrogant and incompetent Lieutenant Dundee. Even Dr. Gregory House has his loyal James Watson and a wide assortment of authority figures who he routinely outsmarts. Holmes self-medicates with cocaine, and House medicates with Vicodin.
Now, various authors have played with the formula to varying degrees of success, but from Encyclopedia Brown to Catafel the Medieval Monk Detective to, let's face it, Detective Pikachu.
Incredibly popular Detective Pikachu,
right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. The sturdy bones of a satisfying detective story are almost always present. You have a stupid police detective and the brilliant mystery detective, consulting detective who solves the crime.
Right.
And you have a body. Usually you find the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these elements are there, which is why nearly 2 centuries after the invention of the detective story, the genre is still going strong.
Yeah.
Now, a detective story is about solving a particular crime. It can be set any place at any time. There have been murder mystery stories written that took place in science fiction universes.
Absolutely. Yeah, the whole subgenre of that. Yeah.
Right.
There are ones in medieval castles. There's ones in the future. There's one that we just saw involving a body appearing in 4 different decades, I believe.
Right. Time travel. A time travel murder mystery. Right.
Yeah,
right.
It's a very elastic genre, but it has certain elements that are always there, which is why detective stories age better than science fiction stories
than science fiction stories, right. Yeah. And unless the author makes some egregious mistake about the time and place of the story, like, for instance, if the suspects on the Orient Express have cell phones all of a sudden, or if Arkady Renko from Gorky Park just decides to use Google to solve the crime, the story otherwise remains timeless.
Yeah, because
they found a body. The police don't know how to solve it. The hero does.
Yeah.
And the end.
That's
that is very satisfying.
And you're reading a period piece. So Sam Spade, the Maltese Falcon doesn't pretend to be about the future or the past or anything else. It's about a particular time and place.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you don't screw up the details about that time and place, that story can be read 100 years later and people still enjoy it. This is
Right.
not true for science fiction because science fiction is inherently speculative. It does not ask who done it, or in the case of Columbo or its wonderful stepchild, let's not forget Poker Face, how done it, which is a really hard thing to write, and they do it really well. Instead, science fiction asks what if, which is one of the reasons why most science fiction ages very badly, much worse than other genres. It's usually because of one or two things, one or two of the following reasons. First, because the technological and social realities of the real world, our world, catch up with the speculation about the future and make those speculations look stupid or absurd or whatever. This is a quote from William Gibson, who's a science fiction writer. Quote, I think the least important thing about science fiction for me is its predictive capacity. Its record for being accurately predictive is really, really poor. If you look at the whole history of science fiction, what people have said is going to happen and what writers have said is going to happen, and what actually happened, it's terrible, unquote. Now, second, and more commonly, a lot of science fiction is aged very badly because the prejudices which the author projected onto their imaginary future sound ridiculous or offensive to modern readers. This is also a quote from William Gibson. Quote, I think that our future has lost that capital F we used to spell it with. The science fiction future of my childhood had a capital F. It was assumed to be an American future, capital A, capital F, because America was the future. The future was assumed to be inherently heroic, and a lot of other things as well, unquote. And there's one more quote by William Gibson that bears on the subject. Quote, it seemed to me that mid-century mainstream American science fiction had often been triumphalist and militaristic, a sort of folk propaganda for American exceptionalism, unquote.
Absolutely.
Damn
And
right.
Driftglass has suggested to me just this week that we change the name of this podcast to, that reminds me of a Robert Heinlein story.
It's true. It's true.
These 1950s and 60s science fiction stories are white guy wins the universe.
Absolutely.
Flash Gordon and John Carter, who John Carter was a Confederate soldier.
Yes, he was.
This is white man triumphalism. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, that does not age well.
No. A lot of the speculation about social trends, about broad ideas about the future, aged okay. But you start looking at the way that it's a white guy on a planet full of primitives that have to be subdued. It just doesn't age well. So when I'm running errands around town, or when I listen to the radio and the news is just too damn infuriating, I sometimes listen to old-timey radio, which is the sort of show my dads might have listened to. I'm sorry, I didn't mean plural dads. Sort of shows my dad might have listened to, but are new to me. There are radio show versions, for example, of Gunsmoke and Have Gun Will Travel, which are both very, very good. There's Jack Benny, which is still very funny. There's Inner Sanctum. There's, of course, Superman. Quite a lot of labor stuff in Superman. Quite a lot of pro-immigration stuff in Superman. Quite a lot of corrupt local politicians try to turn veterans against each other based on their race and religion, which I thought was incredibly woke for 1939.
Well, it was necessary to bring America together to fight the war effort. And so you weren't allowed to hate Italians because everyone has to fight against the Germans, right?
Exactly. We all must be united against the gangsters and the Germans.
Yeah, right.
And in that mix, there's quite a bit of science fiction, too. There's a show called Dimension X, and there's a show called X-1, because for some reason they were really big into the letter X at the time because it was unknown, the X factor. And a lot of it's wonderful, and some of it is very much not wonderful at all. It's pretty terrible. And of the very much not stuff, it's usually that triumphalist, militaristic propaganda for American exceptionalism that William Gibson talked about. It's usually a little more than the deeply regrettable cowboys and Indians stuff that was popular during that period. Westerns like Fort Laramie.
Fort Laramie, starring Raymond Burr as Captain Lee Quince. Specially transcribed tales of the dark and tragic ground of the wild frontier. The saga of fighting men who rode the rim of empire. And the dramatic story of Lee Quince, Captain of Cavalry.
But in this case, the rim of empire, quote unquote, is the American colonization of outer space. as we manifest destiny our way right over one, quote, primitive, unquote, alien culture after another.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now, nobody except maybe grad students studying mid-20th century American fiction actually reads these stories anymore.
No, they're mostly gone.
Modern pluralistic anti-colonial sensibilities have left them behind. On the other hand, even though there are no colonies on the moon or contact with aliens, audiences can still be riveted by 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Uh-huh.
Audiences still return again and again to Blade Runner. And of course, I'm talking about one version of Blade Runner that doesn't have a voiceover. Ridley Scott, you've made many, many wonderful movies. You can let Blade Runner go now.
Just stop it, man. Just
stop it. No voiceovers. Just play the movie. And even though Blade Runner is set in the year 2019, and here we are in 2023 with no off-world colonies and no replicants, the fact is, the story of Blade Runner is a cop going after a corrupt system.
Right.
And you can connect with him.
It's noir. It's rainy,
absolutely
dark
noir. Yes.
A woman, a dame in trouble, a corrupt organization.
Save the girl. Yes.
Yeah, it's all very, very simple. And that's why it lasts, and that's why people still come back to it.
Yep. The reason these stories survived being overtaken by the passage of time, and so many others didn't, was the power of their ideas. What does it mean to be human? That's a big question in Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
What shall the human race become is another question. And I do love how, and I could watch it over and over again, 2001, when Hal starts to lose his mind.
Yes.
And it's almost as if you're watching a person with Alzheimer's.
It is.
There's a tragedy there that he's losing his brain power and he's going away, and he's killed people. Hal has killed people.
Hal is the most human character in the whole movie.
Yeah.
And
he's a
dying.
murderer, though.
and he's a friend to these guys. And they're putting him out of his misery. They have to do it.
Yeah.
But it's tragic what happens to Hal. And is Hal human? Is Hal sentient? Does Hal dying mean we killed some person, some entity?
Yeah. You miss him when he's gone.
Yeah.
So storytellers who take on timeless human questions and do it well are forgiven if they didn't predict in 1968, for instance, as we're still talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey, that Pan Am would be out of business by 1991. And I actually find those brand names to be one of the most charming things about the movie.
Absolutely, because it grounds it in realism. This is, a real company.
And when the man is talking to his daughter on the TV phone.
Right.
And we all talk on FaceTime or Zoom or whatever all the time now in 2023. But when you see that, you can completely identify with the fact that, wow, this is futuristic.
Sure.
And also, it's a human family story. It's going to be her birthday. Right. Her dad's far away. He misses her. He's got to explain to her, when will you be home? And who's taking care of you right now?
Right.
It's a big question, right?
And how are you communicating with your daughter? Over a Bell telephone.
Bell telephone, yeah.
Yeah, again.
That tension in there about who's the adult with you right now, because you're just answering you feel that when you're watching that scene of, this little girl's all by herself talking on a very high technology machine. Oh no, my nanny or grandma or whoever is here. So, because he's away.
Yeah, he's far away.
Can't protect her, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So, those kind of things make this story work. So, all of this brings us to today's timeless subject, which we love to talk about: politics and economics.
In our other podcast, we
talk about it all the time, and that's why sometimes it sneaks into this one. Mm-hmm. Specifically, today we're going to talk about economic conflict between the wealthy and powerful and ordinary men and women.
Yeah, this time our predilection for politics isn't sneaking in; it's kicking in the front door and walking.
Right,
in.
It's kicking in the front door and saying this story is about that. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you have a question in our notes that I found fascinating, Driftwood. As of this writing in this year of 2023, so far, how many documented labor strikes have happened or are happening around the world?
Mm-hmm.
so far just in the calendar year 2023.
Yep. And the answer
And
is?
I guessed 25.
Yeah. I can name 5 or 7 off the top of my head.
I mean, in the United States,
yeah.
yes. You know, we all know about UAW, right? That's the big one. How many around the world that are documented? The answer is 59.
Yep.
Over twice as many as I thought there were.
Yep.
These are strikes.
Yeah.
And here in this country, everyone from actors to auto workers to Starbucks baristas have organized and taken action against the bosses.
Mm-hmm.
And in science fiction, I'm telling you, if you need a villain,
Yep.
corporations make excellent stand-ins for alien invasions.
Exactly.
You know, think about what's the one that I was thinking about the other day? The Fifth Element.
Yes.
You know, and the Stones. And who's the bad guy? He's a corporation guy. He's got a big desk and a lot of money
and a lot of robots and a lot of little things running around. But he's going to choke to death on a cherry pit,
right?
Or something. Right. Needs a human to fix it. Yeah, no. Corporations, you know, giant evil corporations. They're giant corporations are all over William Gibson's writing. It's practically, you know, and I think he was the one who talked about if aliens actually visited and asked to speak to the highest, most organized life forms on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I think it would be American corporations and Japanese kairetsus, which are large organisms, and I think he said the Catholic Church, large human organisms that outlast any individual
and
human
are self-perpetuating.
Being. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Also, think about RoboCop. RoboCop is another example of big corporation is the enemy. And the Terminator. It's interesting that when it finally comes together that, okay, we've got everyone together, including the creator of the RoboCop. And what are they going to do? They're going to go to the company, go to the headquarters, and they're going to destroy the
Skynet.
Intellectual property.
Right. They're going to go destroy
the corporation, right?
Because they lied to us. They lied to us about this.
Yeah.
Corporations make excellent villains, and they make excellent villains in the real world too.
Oh,
and that's why they're extremely relatable. And
how do the evil aliens in Buckaroo Banzai hide themselves? Yo-Yodyne Corporation.
That's right. And they have a very much like Elmo Mush. They have their own very large government contract, which they've been working on for a very long time.
Yeah.
Now, this is why it seemed like a really good time to take a deep dive into one of Frederick Pohl's most famous short stories, The Day the Icicle Works Closed. But before we do that, consider the introduction to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, as read by the inimitable Orson Welles, no relation.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us.
Now, consider the rapaciousness of the worst corporation you can think of. Might be guns or tobacco or oil. They're greedy, they're powerful, they're ruthless, and they are completely unconcerned with who or what they destroy as long as they make a profit, which sounds a whole lot like intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, doesn't it?
Yep.
Corporations with envious eyes who slowly and surely draw their plans against us. Their plans are not Martian death machines, but they're lawsuits and NDAs and deregulation and buying politicians. And the goals are the same: conquest and exploitation, and to hell with the cost in human lives and environmental damage.
Much of Frederick Pohl's fiction remains relevant and readable to this day, because his work often dealt with the eternal human issues of politics and economics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the day the Icicle Works Closed deals with both. It tells the story of the complete collapse of the economy of Altair 9, a world sustained almost entirely by the harvesting and export of rare and valuable pharmaceuticals, which are only found in the antibiotic microbes that give the frozen planet its colorful ice and snow.
Mm-hmm.
Like the spice in Dune, these drugs can only come from the unique environment of one planet, which makes the Icicle Works a very profitable enterprise.
Yes, indeed. The hero of our story is a lawyer named Milo Pulcher, and during the climactic courtroom scene, Milo tells us that, quote, the Icicle Works was the most profitable corporation in the galaxy, unquote. That's a pretty profitable corporation. Until word got around that a competitor had finally managed to manufacture the antibiotics they produce synthetically. Uh-oh. The people of Altair 9 heard about this through the only link they had to the outside world, a media corporation called the Tourism Bureau. And suddenly nobody wants what they make anymore. The good years are over, the bottom's fallen out of the market, and the result is widespread unemployment. So, on Altair 9, the only place left where employment comes easy is renting your body to tourists to hunt local game called airfish. Now, this is a quote from my very own dog-eared copy of the story, so any transcription errors are my own. Quote, worse, the jobs vanished. Pulcher, who is our hero, had been on the corporation's legal staff with an office of his own and a faint hint of a vice presidency someday. He was out. The stenos in the pool, all but 2 or 3 of the 500 who'd once got out the correspondence and the bills, they were out. The shipping clerks in the warehouse were out. The pump hands at the settling tanks were out. The freezer attendants were out. Everyone was out. The plant was closed, unquote.
And yet somehow the committee men still had money.
Mm-hmm.
The politicians, the heads of the Chamber of Commerce, people whose fortunes one would have thought were most directly tied to the implosion of the industry and the sudden worthlessness of their stocks, were the very ones who always seemed to have a fat wad of cash in hand.
Huh.
What's going on there?
Weird. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. So with the economy in the tank, our hero goes from corporate lawyer to public defender, picking up the case of a gang of young people who, not being pretty strong and agile enough to make ends meet, turned to kidnapping.
Mm-hmm.
Milo Pulcher is the attorney who gets assigned to a case in which 5 young men and 1 young woman had tried to kidnap the mayor's son.
Yeah.
For money.
For money.
Because the mayor still has money for some reason.
And that's how you make money with, you know, hold hostages, take prisoners, kidnap people, and demand, because there's no other employment left available to you. So this, as we are told, is a seemingly open and shut case until, plot twist ahead, Milo discovers the young woman in question is an old girlfriend of his. And that's when he starts digging and discovers what's really been going on. Quote, what it all adds up to, ladies and gentlemen, is that Charlie Dickon and a handful of his friends in high places, most of them right here in this room, have cut off communication between Altair 9 and the rest of the galaxy, unquote.
In other words, the story we have been told up to that point is not one of a new and superior product displacing an inferior one in the competitive market. Instead, we find that everything that's happened was part of a plot hatched between local plutocrats and media moguls, to deliberately crash a thriving middle-class manufacturing economy and induce a depression in order to turn a prosperous world into a feudal state divided between the super-rich and a horde of desperate and permanently poor peons. People so broke in an economy so bad that they must now rent their bodies out to make a living or turn to crime.
Now, this is the point at which, if we were talking about this, just you and me over a beer, this is where I would mutter under my breath, Escapist literature, my ass. Because a lot of science fiction that's really well written is not predictive about gadgets, but it is very accurate about human behavior. And it is not escapist at all. It tells a true story about what goes on in the human heart. And that, perversely, is why this kind of science fiction endures while so much else is long forgotten. Because while there are no humans living on Altair 9 right now, and no single entity like the Tourism Bureau controlling galactic media, every day here in the year 2023, you can find stories of greedy corporations screwing up people's lives for profits, or politics being manipulated by moneyed interests to the detriment of the rest of us, or economic data being twisted or fabricated by media corporations in order to create a crisis where there actually is none and advance the political agenda of those media corporations.
Starting in the 1980s in this country, the United States, there came to be the widespread belief that the manufacturing economy of the United States was dead and gone forever. Those middle-class jobs had all gone overseas, and it was due to tectonic economic forces beyond anyone's control. And it was time to get over it and move on.
Nothing anybody can do about it.
I do remember the late, great Senator Paul Tsongas of Massachusetts warning everybody that this was a choice.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it was a terrible choice that we were making to export all the manufacturing jobs.
Oh, I worked closely with the former president once upon a time of the Illinois Manufacturing Association during the Great Recession, or just before.
Yeah.
And he would ask the question, when did we vote to deindustrialize this country? Because I don't remember voting to deindustrialize this country, but somehow we did.
And it was due to tectonic economic forces you couldn't do anything about. Nobody can do nothing about it.
Bullshit.
Well, it turns out that wasn't exactly true.
No, it wasn't.
Now, yes, many low-skilled labor jobs were probably doomed. And some of that was due to robotic technology taking over and so forth. There were some technological things that happened that would make, bolting jobs go away.
Yeah, cheap labor will always find the place where the cheap labor is the cheapest. That's just going to happen. But
that's true. But the loss of higher skilled jobs and the shuttering of thousands of small factories had less to do with unstoppable forces of nature and more to do with a panicked stampede caused by other factors like insane tax policies. Reagan. That rewarded businesses for going overseas, literally. Massive tax cuts, again, Reagan, that incentivized not reinvesting in equipment and training. If you give someone a tax cut for investing in their factories, you're making it easier for that factory to be modernized and keep those jobs there.
Right. If you have a high threshold, but again, if you have a tax break for people who take their profits and reinvest in machinery and training, you get a lot more machinery and training and a lot more growth in business.
And that's a choice. If you just give everybody a massive tax cut, they can send their jobs anywhere. And also there was a lack of succession planning at companies where dad was set to retire and had never given any thought with what to do with the actual company and factory next, but he certainly wanted his kids to work in finance, not in manufacturing at the factory. Right. And he worked hard to send his kids to college in accounting so they wouldn't have to work in the dirty factory, right?
That's right.
So once the belief that manufacturing was, first of all, a bad job to have, and was also dead in the United States, and all of that belief took hold, then trade schools started shutting down. You didn't have VOTEC in high schools.
That's right.
High schools stopped inviting factory owners in on career day.
Yeah. I worked with a lot of manufacturers, and they said right around the 80s, suddenly I stopped being invited to career day at school because nobody wanted their kids working in a dirty, dangerous factory anymore. They wanted to be programmers or finance majors or lawyers. And they were like, but these are really good jobs and they have a future, and they couldn't figure out why everyone suddenly lost interest. Again, there was no election. There was no vote. It was, well, let's put it this way. The collapse here in the real world was much slower and multi-causal than like the Icicle Works on Altair 9, right? But in both cases, viable industries were pushed into early graves rather than dying of natural causes. Finally.
And the wrong people got rich over it.
Oh, yeah. And got crazy rich. as to the power of the media to manipulate public opinion about the economy here in the real world, yeah, we're going to go there. Consider this from the Center for American Progress, July 25th, 2023. Quote, 7 reasons the U.S. economy is among the strongest in the G7. Cooling inflation, continued economic growth, and a strong labor market exemplify the sustained resilience of the U.S. economy, particularly compared with other advanced economies, unquote.
Yep. And this from Reuters, October of 2023. Quote, U.S. economy delivers blockbuster performance in the third quarter, unquote. Blockbuster performance, that's great news, right?
Everyone
and
loves
who
good
couldn't
news.
stand a little great news these days? And yet, consider this from MSNBC, and this is from this month. Quote, Republicans' views of the economy are completely detached from reality. By most standard measures, the American economy is going gangbusters, and people are certainly acting like the economy is good. Consumer spending is strong, and Americans are starting new businesses at the highest rate since the Census Bureau began tracking this data in 2006. And yet, when pollsters ask people how they think the economy is doing, they don't just express concern. They say the economy is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
The polling data doesn't show that Americans think the economy stinks so much as it shows that Republicans continually say it stinks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading an article, Driftglass, about Social Security and younger Americans' expectations about Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ask in polls about anything, in this particular instance, it was Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask them about anything, this article mentions that pessimistic views on the future of Social Security in this instance are directly related to something called negativity bias.
Mm-hmm.
The tendency to exaggerate negative information, such as reports of the need to reform Social Security and so forth, presents a diagnostic expectation model that accounts for a behavioral tendency to overweight a narrow range of possible future events in light of incoming information. So, in response to negative news, people develop overly pessimistic expectations.
Yep.
And I think the shorter version of that, and it's something I've said for years, is people believe when they're being negative, they sound smarter.
Yes, absolutely.
And so they will say that to a pollster, oh, everything's terrible, everything's in the toilet, whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They think that makes them sound like they have some sort of analysis instead of being rosy about things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me say this. 10,000 years ago, when I was in my 20s, the common belief among people who were my age was what about Social Security? Won't be around when I retire.
Right.
It'll be
Oh,
gone.
and that's still the case today with 20-year-olds.
It's always the case that in the next few years, everything's going to go to shit and we're all going to die.
Right.
And
right.
there is some truth to that. There's some genuine dangers out there. There's some really bad things on the horizon when it comes to climate change, unless we get our shit together. And even if we do, things are going to get very rough for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things that are controllable. And then there are things that are just lied about. And when you own a large media corporation that has enormous sway over tens of millions of people and their opinions about things,
Exactly.
and you tell them things you know aren't true, you can, in fact, affect the economy. You can, in fact, affect elections. You can get your agenda passed, even though what you're saying is absolute bullshit, because the people who listen to you only listen to you. You are, in effect, the Tourism Bureau. You are, in effect, the only source of data, information these people are listening to, so they believe it.
Yes, our economy is based on human beliefs.
Right.
If you believe the economy is great, you're going to go out and spend money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to increase sales and improve the economy, right?
Right. So in conclusion, the American economy, a land of contrast. No. So in conclusion, the day the Icicle Works by Frederick Pohl endures because it is a story about the power of propaganda in the hands of unscrupulous politicians and media corporations to wreak havoc in the real world. So let me reiterate, escapist literature, my ass.
I was wondering if there's any character in that story named Rupert Murdoch.
Well, there is basically.
Yeah.
That Charlie Dickon is it's a cabal of rich people who are controlling, who destroy an entire planet's economy just because they control the media.
Yep.
And they can profit from it. And And we did want to remind people that Fred Pohl wrote a lot of stories about the economy, a lot of stories about economic stuff and the future. And one of our
favorites, the Space Merchants, right?
He wrote with.
We've talked about that so many times.
Oh yeah, we have to do a long thing on just the Space Merchants because it is such a.
Well, I think we already have actually, like the second episode.
Yeah, I think we alluded to it or talked about it in some depth, but we should even go deeper. Because it really does have a future in which advertising companies, corporations have destroyed the ecosystem of the planet, destroyed the habitability of the Earth. We're on a death spiral.
Yeah. And I would say that that's a nice complimentary audiobook to have if you're listening to Rachel Maddow's book and getting depressed.
Yeah.
Let your ears listen to the Space Merchants.
Yeah.
It's not really long and it's very easy to listen to. And fun. And even though things are bad that are happening there, you will laugh.
You will.
At the way these authors talk about the future.
Well, and Fred Pohl did write ad copy. He didn't spend his whole life.
He's a lively writer. He's a lively writer.
And he knows what he's talking about. And he wrote it with a guy named Cyril or C.M. Kornbluth. And they both have experience in that world. They both sort of know how advertising works. And the entire book is about how completely the world population has been manipulated into doing anything advertising companies tell them to do, and how politicians are now identified by the corporations that own them. And explicitly, you are the senator from Ford Motor Company. You're the congressman from Frigidaire. I mean, that's how you know. And they have ad valorem voting by money. The richer you are, the more votes you get. And it's a complete world laid out as if dreamed up by advertising executives about the best possible world you could live in. And the people at the top do very well. But our hero gets knocked down from his great place at the height of his profession to the bottom rung of the ladder and discovers what the real world is like. And
can I talk to you for a moment about, or discuss with you for a moment about this evolution of the white male hero of 1950s and 60s science fiction and how that now appears dated?
Oh, yeah.
Michael Knowles, who is a jackass who podcasts for Daily Wire, right-wing jackass, was actually on his show yesterday defending blackface. And saying, "Oh, you know, really? we sit here and say that blackface is terrible, but really there's nothing inherently wrong with blackface. Should we cancel an entire major form of the American theatrical tradition?" And then he goes on to talk about how we still watch Sanford and Son.
Yes, we do.
From the 70s.
You know why?
And that's the minstrel tradition, that somehow we're still doing that, and we don't put that away, but we put away blackface. And the response to all of this has been, as you would expect, people going into their corners, the racists in one corner, saying, "What's wrong with blackface?" And everyone, all the sane people in the other corner going, "What the hell are you talking about?"
I want a fantasy matchup between Michael Knowles and Red Fox, in which case they're both in good health, and Red Fox and Michael Knowles tells him, "You're just doing minstrel stuff." And watch how fast his teeth disappear down his throat.
Seriously.
Because, no, Red Fox was a consummate professional, a great and extremely blue comedian.
Oh, stand up. His stand-up, it cannot be repeated.
No,
even with a warning, it's dirty as hell. Yeah, funny, but dirty as hell. Funny.
And and every one of these great comedians stands on the shoulders of the person before them.
Sure, right, right.
A pig meat was a politician, and who came up with a pig bladder and slapped people. Mom's Mabley was funny.
Absolutely amazing. Speaking of Red Fox, you will just get my dad to collapse into laughter. All you have to say is, "Hey, lady, your sign fell down."
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Go Google it.
Yeah. Don't make us say it.
Dirty joke.
Yeah. But that's the point. It is but assholes like Knowles are being deliberately provocative. Like,
Right.
why can't we have Nazis things? Nazis did good things. You know, they did highways and rockets and things. Why can't we get
They
that
had
back?
art museums.
Why? Yeah, they had art museums. Why must we? And they like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Goethe. And you know why they're doing it. They're doing
Yeah.
it to be asshole clicks and likes. Clicks and likes.
Yep.
And the more
And
attention.
hates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hate watching is still clicks. Yep. Yep.
No, there's a quote by Ray Bradbury I used to have at the top of my blog, which is still buried under the graphic, I think, somewhere, which is, I don't try to predict the future, I try to prevent it.
Yep. Yep.
And that's what a lot of science fiction writers did. They weren't trying to predict the future. They were trying to say, literally, if this goes on, things are going to get very bad very fast. And Fred Pohl's full of that stuff. These are cautionary tales. They're funny. Right. They're well written, but they're cautionary tales. If you put enough power in the hands of unscrupulous people, they're going to do terrible things. And that's where I think the lesson is lost on people who just want to bring back blackface.
Yeah. Or the guy from, was it Dasani, the Coca-Cola bottler, saying, well, people don't have a right to clean water.
Yeah.
We're going to corner the water market.
Yeah.
And sell water to people all over the world.
Say that out loud. Go ahead and keep saying that out loud. Yeah, there's a lot of loss. I'm very sad about the fact that we can't talk about those things anymore without Michael Knowles, people like that intruding into the middle.
Well, I apologize for bringing him into our show.
No, not you.
But it seemed relevant from the standpoint of we do evolve. We have evolved from, Blackish is not Sanford and Son, right? No. There is an evolution toward Black writers, Black voices, people deciding, okay, we're not going to write this way. We're going to write a more realistic family environment, family structure with a comedic slant, but also, a typical African-American family with a dad at home is going to be the reality on television. We're going to put that on television.
Well, and there is a lot of virtue. There is a place. Now, you might have to cut this out once I say it. Just warning you. Actually, no, it's pretty straightforward.
You aren't going to say Cosby, are you?
No. There is a place for blackface, and it's on Mad Men. It's Roger Sterling getting drunk and putting on a performance that horrifies people who have anyone's sensibilities. This is the same show and this is, again, a period piece. It's about the racism and dysfunction and failure and troubled man syndrome, white man syndrome.
And it's a white drunk guy with tons of money sees nothing wrong with it. You know everything about him because he chooses.
And when they put
to
a
use
joke
blackface, right?
When they put a joke ad in the paper about affirmative action hiring, and wonder why all these Black people showed up for a job.
Right.
It's like because they didn't think it was funny; they thought it was real.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh shit! Now we have to hire one of them." Because why is the lobby full of Black people? Well, and he didn't use the word Black people, and it's the fact that these people were so oblivious to their privilege and so deeply racist and didn't realize it. That in the context of showing a show that takes place from 1960 to 1970 is extremely valuable. It's an extremely valuable artifact.
Well, and the times were evolving. I mean, you have that show going over the course of 15 to 20 years.
Oh, a decade, and just one decade.
How much change radically?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
In terms of gender, in terms of race, that was a very volatile time.
Yeah. Well, when I forget whose mother, who is becoming, who has dementia, is awakened by her son saying they shot Kennedy.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, that happened. And he meant Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
But she confused the two Kennedys. She thought, well, that couldn't have happened. But it's the moon landing. But it's even a genius in the way that it does, like Shakespeare did, the play within the play.
Yeah.
There's a scene where I believe Don is filming his daughter's birthday party. And you see him looking through the camera and trying to find these happy shots of happy family. And then you move the little handheld camera away and you see the drunk in the living room hitting on someone's wife,
Right.
or
right.
the guy smacking
Everybody's
his
having an
wife.
affair or hating one another or
And
getting a
it's like,
divorce.
oh God,
or yeah.
this is what we remember. This camera, this image we created of the period is what we remember. Here's what was really going on at the time. And in that context, it is entirely appropriate to show the people, warts and all, what they were doing and how they felt about race and religion and sex and abortion and you name it. And so there's a good creative person can use the tools that are available to them. I always say, I own all 300,000 words in the English language, and so do you.
Right.
They're all ours. It's how you use them. And people like Fred Pohl were really good at pulling out the human lesson, the important human information about what's going on in the world and why it's dangerous and why we should take care, and putting it in a science fiction context. So we can sell it to Galaxy or Magazine or to Campbell or whoever. And some other people are relics of their time. They wrote about white guys going out into the universe and conquering native tribes and bringing them civilization at the point of a gun. Those are relics too. And studying those might be useful, but they're not good fiction. They're garbage fiction because they don't understand the purpose of fiction. They were cranked out for magazines for, a half a penny a word. And these are artifacts of our past. And I'm sure in the moldering boxes of old magazines we have around this place, I can find 24 stories of colonialist, expansionist American fiction.
Absolutely.
That I have no interest in talking about on this podcast. Fred Pohl stands above that crowd because he was so much better at identifying the good idea, the big idea behind it all, and creating a context around it.
And the fact that he was an ad writer gave him those tools.
Yeah, he knew about that.
He understood human nature because he had to sell to it all the time.
Well, he was
able to take it and turn it into a really cogent analysis of what was going on in our culture.
He was, I think, Asimov's literary agent.
Oh,
he was an editor at a magazine, so he understood the business world. He understood how those people worked. And you bring all that to bear, and you sit him down with a really good collaborator, like with Kornbluth, with the Space Merchants, and you get a work of art that lasts 70 years because it's really good and it's worthwhile, and it is timeless in the same way 2001 is timeless and Blade Runner is timeless. And let's face it, Escape from New York is timeless. I don't care what you say. Anyway,
on that note,
Science Fiction University is a project of DGBG Productions. You can support this show by donating via Patreon or PayPal. Details on our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com. And thanks for being with us.
see you next time.
See you next time.